Okay,
It's in the air now.
where were we at?
Oh, you're talking about the first measure?
Okay, so, yeah, modulation to a major, and again, similar sort of, four measure structure, right?
No, the partitura.
Oh, the partitura, that's right, yeah, okay. Well, but we already get that, right? That's not a huge deal, that's,
Okay.
like I said, that's just like a little side note. I think there was, we don't have to do the other questions. Okay, so, let's see. Well, so how do we get back to the main key? Anybody want to? So if we start in A major here, and then again, this is like the A theme transpose, but it's in A major, and we're getting essentially the same stuff until we get this like G natural here, would start to kick us back into D major, right?
Mm-hmm. But then you have the C natural.
Where's the C natural?
The fourth measure, the same line to the end. Last
Oh,
one.
yeah. Well, then we start, so we head back, we start in A major and head back towards D major, and I would say we're back in D major about here, right? But then, yeah, the C natural tends to kick us into the key of the subdominant, right, G major. So if we're in D major, the dominant is A, but the subdominant is G, right? And we could talk about, like, remember secondary functions?
Mhm.
So, if I'm in D major, and I have a D chord, that's 1, right?
Mhm.
But if I add a C natural on top of that, then it becomes a D dominant 7th, and it's outside of the key, and its resolution is going to be different, right? It's going to take us somewhere else. Actually, let me do it this way. That's our 1 chord, but if I do this, which is a D dominant 7th, that chord is going to take us to a G major triad, right? The 7th we're going to want to have resolved down by step, and this is going to go up to the dominant, so that's going to tend to resolve to the note G, right? From a D7 to a G. So then in D major, we would call that 5/7 of 4, and then going to 4. Does everybody follow that?
Yep.
Secondary dominant, so we call it 5/7 of 4. Now, but in this case, what I think is happening, I mean, we could analyze it that way, but you find that there's a bunch of different things being explored here. Now, we could analyze it all in G major. Maybe that actually is the way to do it. So we could say that this is 5 of 4. If we say that this is 5/7 of 4 in D major, so let's say this is 1 in D major. Then when we get down to here, we're going to call that 4. And then what about when we get to this part here?
I'm sorry?
Well, what about the last part of this measure?
Oh, you have a G sharp. You
Yeah.
have, there's a C sharp.
Right, but the C sharp is really just bringing back in, right? We had C natural. The C sharp is in the key signature. This is more of a courtesy accidental.
Oh, so you mean like an encore tone?
No, yeah, so it is an encore tone. It is an encore tone, but what I'm saying is the C sharp is not as significant as the G sharp. The G sharp is the really significant part.
Oh,
The C sharp, not so much.
okay.
I know your eye is drawn to the sharp, but remember, it's part of the key.
So if you include the bottom and the top, I see a G sharp right in the bass, I see a B, I see a D. Either or, it's just a G sharp diminished chord. No? No?
Yeah, yes.
Oh,
So,
Yay.
this is my chord,
Uh-huh.
which is a G sharp diminished,
Okay.
right? Where does that want to go?
A.
A. Right? In the key of A, it would be really simple, right? This would be, if this was the key of A, then this would be 7 to 1, right?
Uh-huh.
But in the key of D, we would call it something different. We haven't covered this yet. This is a secondary leading tone function. You guys in Harmony 2 did it already, but we would call it 7 diminished of 5 going to 5. Right?
Oh, yeah.
We'll do more with secondary leading tones next week.
Yeah, I don't remember going
I
on.
mean, I remember only secondary.
Yeah, I read that.
I don't.
Yeah, I don't think he did the leading tone
Leading
ones.
tone.
But I'm guessing the same thing, it's just a 7 chord.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's two important relationships in the secondary business, let's say. I'm going to use this board over here. Squish it all in there, but let's keep D major. There's the leading tone to tonic and the dominant to tonic. Those are our two huge relationships, and so this would be like a 7 diminished of 5, and this would be 5 of 5. Right? So if we want to emphasize a chord in a key, if we want to temporarily tonicize it, that's what secondary dominants do, is they temporarily tonicize a harmony other than the tonic, right? So if we want to temporarily tonicize the dominant, there are two ways we can do that. One with a leading tone, the other with a dominant type of function of 5 to 1. So this would be probably the most, starkest would be an E dominant 7, right? So we do an E dominant 7, leading to an A, that would be 7 diminished. Could do something like that. A G sharp, fully diminished 7 chord, but then we would call it 7 diminished 7 of 5. We could do something like that. So, but I don't want to get to that too much this time because we will cover secondary leading tone. But just to say, there are two ways of temporarily tonicizing a particular chord in a key. One is the dominant relationship, the other is the leading tone relationship. And this particular chord is exploiting that leading tone relationship. So if we look at G sharp and B and D, that all forms a G sharp diminished triad, which pushes us to the A chord, which we get the A, and the C sharp, which is our root and third, and we get the fifth, and we're in A.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, how do we view this A sharp?
Oh, yeah. So you have the A sharp, you have a C sharp, and you have an E. That's also a 7th chord because A sharp diminished again, right?
Right.
But this time it's going to the B, but it's the B minor. Because in the key of D, relative minor is B minor.
Right. So, oops. B min.
It's kind of what I did with my menu.
So how would you describe this relationship?
I'm sorry?
How would you describe this relationship? Like if I was doing a Roman numeral analysis, what would you?
I'll probably put a diminished 7th chord, right, of 6, right? And then I just put a 6 right there.
Right, because in D major, B minor is the 6th chord.
Okay.
So if we're looking at the context of D major, this would be 7 diminished of 6 to 6. And again, it's the same thing that happened here, but now we're using that chord, 7 diminished of 6 to 6. So if we're doing, a harmonic analysis, this would be 7 diminished of 5, going to 5. This would be 7 diminished of 6, 6, sort of. But again, I want to reemphasize, counterpoint, interval. That's we're doing a harmonic analysis because we're assuming some applied harmonies. But it's really about the leading tone relationship. That's the main thing driving this is the G sharp to the A or the A sharp to the B. That's what's pushing us into those different areas.
Interesting. We're gonna be able to hear it afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then, so this kind of heads us towards an A thing here, right? A, but because of the presence of the G naturals, it has more the impression of still staying in D major, right? Represent D major, which is our 5, which is going to take us back down to, right? Down. Like a half cadence. Well, take us back to D major. This is where harmonic analysis gets weird because I would say this is 5 and this is kind of 4, right? Or 2, in other words, predominant. And in traditional common practice harmony, that would be a strict no-no, right? Like I can't do 5 to 4, but you might make a case for kind of the 1 chord there. It's not very dominant.
Yeah, I see the 1 chord.
What would you hear it? What would
Yeah.
you hear it as?
Well, as in looking at it, I hear it as dominant. I really, even though there's a short 1 chord here, to me that seems too fast. And I almost hear it like 5 to 4, or I do hear it like 5 to 4. But again, you can sort of make a case for 1 there. The one that just seems to go by so quickly. We'll listen to it again. Okay. Want to listen to it again?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what do you think? Any questions or comments?
Who's the composer?
Magdalena, or you just, okay.
Yeah.
The only thing, so is it a rounded binary?
I would say no. No, actually, no.
I don't think so, because there's.
Yeah,
It
like
doesn't really
I
bring
see.
back the A idea, right?
Yeah, they bring it in the beginning of the B section.
This is a literal, I don't have it all there, but you know, it's the same thing as the A, the cadence at the end. But is that really enough to say that's A? You know, I don't know. You know, and it's transposed too.
Mhm.
So it's not a literal representation. So, you know, continuous, yes. Rounded, I would say no. I would have to agree. Because there's no repetition of the D major material in D major at the end as such, like a literal repetition, which we really want. And it would have to be substantial. You know, this kind of cadential form with a like the, you know, ba 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 is not a great, like, what is it? You know, a great piece of melodic material, an arpeggiated chord. Everybody good with that? Okay, so again, the binaries, the continuous versus the sectional, and the roundedness is bringing some A back. Okay. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about the sonata form, go back into that, just kind of review that, and then we'll look at one of those. So let me turn this thing on. So in, well, okay, for terminology. Sonata form, sonata allegro form, first movement form, these are all synonymous terms for the same thing, right? There was this kind of form that arose during the classical era that is based somewhat on the rounded binary form, but of course is much more extensive. And the kind of sonatas I was talking about with Scarlatti earlier, the kind of A section, the A modulated to a new key is these kind of continuous binaries that Scarlatti wrote. That's really the model of the sonata form. But it's more elaborate. And the important thing is that modulation at the beginning that creates that structural dissonance. So if I start out in the beginning, I know, last time I used the term themes, right? Didn't I say theme 1 and theme 2 and that sort of thing? That's a little simplistic. And so I prefer to describe it as tonal area 1. So we establish a key, a tonal area. And then we modulate through a transition to a second tonal area, which we will call tonal area 2. And the reason I'm putting it that way rather than saying theme 1 and theme 2 is because although oftentimes there is a theme in this area and a second theme in this area, there can be more than one theme. So we could call it like this, like themes, or theme or theme 1, and then the same thing would be true here, theme, or themes 2. Does that make sense? So the important thing actually is not the thematic material, the melodies, but the fact that you are establishing one key. And so you could have 1 melody, 2 melody, 3 melodies here. Same thing here, 1 melody, 2 melody, 3. Although 3 is kind of getting overwhelmed, but you could. But the important thing is that you move from one tonal area to a different tonal area. And so that sets up that, like I said, that structural dissonance, or that moving to a new key, which at some point we need to resolve. We can't just take the listener from one key to another key and then just walk away. Okay, right? We have to bring them home. And so this moving from one tonal area to another that's the important function. Does that make sense? It's the moving, the creation of that structural distance by moving from one key to another that is the thing. The other thing is, the other problematic thing with calling it themes is that there are some monothematic sonata forms. And by that, I mean the theme 1 and theme 2 are almost identical, except one is in one key and one is in, or the theme 1 is stated in the first key and then restated but in the new key. And so there is no really theme 1 and theme 2. They're both the same, but they're in different keys. Haydn did that, I'd say fairly often. They call them monothematic sonata forms. And so again, the important thing is the change of key, not that I have one theme and then another. Not that you can't do it that way. It's actually fairly often done that way. Like I have one theme in one key and then I do a modulation through, we call this part the transition. And then I move to a new key and state a new theme, and that's my sonata exposition. But I just want you to understand it's more about the tonal area than it is. And so you'll see a variety of things. Like you might have one melodic idea and a different melodic idea in the tonal area 1, then a modulation, then just one melodic idea in tonal area 2. Or you might have one melodic idea here and then a modulation, and then a melodic idea and a second melodic idea in tonal area 2. So it's not about the melodies or the themes, it's about the change of key. And then typically, at the end of the exposition, there's a closing theme, and I'll write that like this. Just because I'm putting it scrunched because that's not the main meat of the form, right? That is, like, this is the big part of it. This is really just a way of finishing off the section. Before you get to a double bar, there's the whole exposition supposed to be repeated. So in the sonata form, this is the exposition. We start in one key, we move to a different key and establish a different key. We establish the new key through the closing theme, which is supposed to reinforce the new key. Like we've arrived, here I'm going to tell you, that we're in this new key, boom, boom, boom. And then we're done. That's the exposition. Then there's a development section. Which is themes 1 and themes 2, new melodic material, just develop. Very typically like state at different pitch levels, transposed, new keys, round the circle of fifths, all different kinds of possibilities. And then, in the recapitulation, we have tonal area 1 again. And then a transition that is not a modulation to tonal area, to the same tonal area, but we have now themes 2 in that, right? So we have theme 1 with themes 1 and themes 2 in the same tonal area. So, whereas we created a structural dissonance in the exposition, we resolved that in the recapitulation by repeating the material that was presented in a different key in the exposition in the same key, both sections in the end. Does that make sense? It's a larger, it's kind of, binary, we all understood, right? Like we went through it, and I think everybody here got it. This requires you to kind of like broaden your thinking in terms of what your scope is, what you're looking at. And the idea that, somebody listening to a piece, in the structure of the whole piece is going to hear the modulation, hear the development, and then hear the recapitulation. In other words, the resolution of this exposition is kind of a, like, are listeners really hearing that? Well, some will and some won't, Those who are really experienced in music and have the skill will hear it. Those who are just coming to hear a Beethoven symphony, it's not going to make any impression on them, probably. Right? But they were thinking that way. And I made the point last time, it's also important to recognize that this is based on what was called rhetoric. Anybody know what rhetoric, rhetoric? Some of it has to do with public speaking or making an argument. And maybe even in English class you encounter these kind of rhetorical models, right? Where you introduce a topic, you develop it, and then you repeat, that same idea. That whole thing of like, tell them what you're going to say it, tell them what you said. Public speaking, sometimes they talk about that, right? And so in this exposition, you are presenting the problem. You are showing it in all its facets. And by the way, spatially, this is wrong. Like, the development section should be bigger. It should be bigger than the exposition or the recapitulation. And then you are reminding, here's the problem. Here's all the possibilities have to do with the problem. Here's the resolution of that problem, my idea about it. So it's kind of based on those rhetorical models, and that was intentional, by the way. That was not like they just were guessing. They were intentionally trying to apply things about public speaking or poetry or argumentation to music as a way of making the music structural in the same way that some of these other art forms were, particularly literature. Because they were very much interested in structure. Good? So in Harmony 3, those of you who are going into Harmony 3, you're just going to write the exposition, not the development of the recapitulation. You can if you want to, if you get really adventurous. But as we were just saying, like, this is a huge leap in terms of musical, like, scope understanding. I'm not sure how to put it, but like, in terms of broadening your thinking about music, like how it can stretch over not just 32 measures, but a whole bunch of measures. To write an entire sonata form is pretty daunting, I will tell you. So to write just the exposition is enough, we feel. So try to write the exposition if you're, like, again, really adventurous, or you want to go on, or after Harmony 3 is over, you want to write the rest of your sonata form perfect. But don't get too bogged down in this stuff. Just make sure that this is really well developed. Because it is kind of difficult. All right, so let's look at an example. I think, again, looking at the music is always very helpful to... like last time we looked at the Beethoven Sonata, but I'd like to look at the Mozart String Quartet. So how many have the packet from last time? Or actually, let's put, how many need one? You need one? Jesus, did you?
Yeah, I got it.
You got it already?
No, I forgot one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Brody, do you have one?
Yeah.
Okay. So the very last example is this Mozart String Quartet. I couldn't tell you what page, but it's Quartetto number 8, this one. Okay. By Mozart. And so it's in sonata form. Let's listen to it. Now think about the idea of starting in one tonal area, moving to a different tonal area, saying something new, then going on to develop and so on. What was I going to ask? Oh, so what key, just kind of broadly, what key are we starting in?
F.
F. And so what key are we likely to go to?
C.
C, which is the dominant, right? In the key of F, C major is the dominant, so we're likely to go to C major. So just keep that in mind as we go on. So let's see. Computer. Mozart String. Do not do that. to listen to the whole thing or just exposition? Whole thing? All right, let's listen to the whole thing, and we'll go back and focus on it. So this is after the double R. There's a whole, you notice the second repeat wasn't done. There's a whole controversy about whether that should be done or not, whether it gets to be too involved, too long, or whether it should actually be performed or not. But, okay, so did you see where the different parts laid out, like the exposition, the development, and the recapitulation? Let's go through it sort of. Just look at it kind of broadly. So we know we start in F major, right? Where do we think we end up in C major so that we hear, like, we've established a new theme? I know there's some fooling around with C major, but where do we really kind of hear, like, something different and new? Anybody want to put an idea out there?
Are you talking about the exposition or the development part?
Just the exposition, yeah. So our first tonal area is F. We modulate to C major. And again, like, so part of the modulation includes getting to C major and maybe even reinforcing C major before we really introduce the second theme or second tonal area. And typically the new tonal area is set off by some new, presentation of new melodic material to make it different. Well, let's start. So we start off. Oh, wait a minute, I'm not projecting. Oh, we're gonna turn on. So we start off in F major, right, and there's some material presented in F major, still F major, still, cadence in F major, still going on. But down at the bottom system, we start to get some kind of movement towards, and we see our first B natural here, right? Saying, okay, I think we're heading towards C major. This looks like C major harmony to me, C major, G, dominant seventh-ish, C major, right? So in this last like 4 or 5 measures, that's when we arrive at C major. So that's the transition. And then the second page, we start some really different material, right? Like this stuff, these little dotted 8th and 16th note figures. Now I know we've got F sharp in there, but think of the F sharp as emphasizing the dominant, G, right? So that's the leading tone to G. And so what we're really doing is we're saying this is the dominant G here. And so we're in C major now. So this material, even though there's F sharps up there, it's all about C major. And if you look at it, if you ignore the F sharp and just thought of those repeated Gs, this would all be very C major-ish. Same kind of just harmony, C major. Until we, down here, there is some, inclusion of other harmonies in the second system. We get the B, we get the B flat sometimes, but it's really, this is all like sequential presentation of different material. It's not like we're really changing keys. We probably analyze these as like secondary dominants or secondary, other functions here, like 5 of 6 to 6, something like an E triad going to an A minor triad, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? So we're not changing keys, we're still in C major. We're just printing some other secondary functions. So that motif with the dotted 8th and 16th continues down to the bottom, where we really come to like a cadence in C major here, right? Perfect authentic cadence here, 5 to 1. And then we get this new melodic idea, which is our closing theme. We're going to say this, now we're saying, okay, we're in C major, and we're kind of just going to present fooling around in C major. Again, F sharps I know, but those are really just like apoggiatures or non-chord tones, neighboring tones, all like that, until we repeat, all this kind of like solid 8th note stuff. And again, perfect authentic cadence, C major. So that's our exposition. And in the exposition this would be our tonal area 1 starts here, right? And we're moving around. We start to transition at the bottom of the first page to C major until we come to a full cadence in C major. Then at the top of the second page, we present new material. And again, right, this is very distinguished from the other F major stuff, right? New material in C major. We go along with that for a while, and cadence in C major, and then present this kind of noodling around, closing theme in C major to just reinforce. That's the idea of a closing theme, is to reinforce the new key, right? And then we stay in that and cadence in C major. Then we start the development section here, which presents some of the same material from the exposition in different keys, kind of moves around from key to key until we get to the recapitulation starts here. right? And so we hear the same theme one or same material presented in tonal area one at the beginning. That continues. And then when we start to, where's our? So here is the start of our sort of, what was our start of our transition before, but again, there's no modulation to the new key. Actually, what Mozart does is he kind of gets involved in so we're in F major. If we go to the subdominant B major, and then, how can I put this? So when initially we went from F major to C major, which was a dominant relationship. If we go from F major to B flat, and then move to B flat's dominant, the B flat's dominant is F, right? So we sort of move to B flat as a way of then moving to the dominant of B flat, but it's really just keeping us in F. So that we end up, when we finally get to this stuff, it's a half cadence here, but we start this in this. Remember before this was G and F sharp, right? Which was the dominant in the key of C major. Now it's C and B natural, which is the dominant in the key of F major. So we repeat the same material, but in the new key of F, or the key of the whole piece of F major. And that's presented in F major, which is different. And again, resolving that structural conflict between those two keys. And that then just takes us all the way to the end of the piece, and we get the same closing formula, except now repeated in F. It's really not any different than it was at the beginning. It's just transposed to key of F all the way through to the end here. And so the whole piece ends in F. That makes sense? It's something, I should post the recordings in the Canvas show. I've never think of that before. It would really, the reason I'm saying that is because I will take the score home and listen to it a few times, listen for the different structural pieces. It'll start to gel. I can almost guarantee it. But it's something you have to come at through repeated listening, because like I said, it's an expansion of your mind, like your scope of understanding. And so to hear it once and go, I got it, it's probably not going to happen. But to listen to it multiple times, you'll start to put the pieces together, and it won't seem so daunting. Brody, you had a question?
Was there any sequentials here?
Well, I think with the closing theme, well, wait a minute, no, actually, there's a few things. Sequential modulations, not so much, but like, if we look at, this is the start of the development section. And bear in mind, this is an alto clef. But this kind of, that's a sequence, right? And it's based on a function of the A theme, a little section of the A theme. And it's very typical for development sections. Is take just like, I would call this a motive, not even a theme. Like this is just a motive. And sequence it in different keys. So you get like a C major presentation, then a D minor presentation, then a G major presentation, then a C sharp diminished presentation, maybe? Yeah, so to D minor. So there's even a certain, so that through the use of that motive, a kind of modulation is taking place. You could look at this and say, okay, this is 1 in C major, this is 2, this is 5, but then this becomes something different, right? The C sharp and the B flat, it's like a C sharp fully diminished 7th chord. And C sharp fully diminished would normally take us to D minor. So then it kicks us into D minor, where, we could say maybe that's 1 in D minor, that's 2 in D minor, that's 5 in D minor. That makes, I'm going too fast, but. So now that same thing is done, what was done in C major, 1, 2, 5, is done in D minor, 1, 2, 5. So there's patterns in patterns. You know, the motive itself is a pattern that's repeated sequentially, but the whole 1, 2, 5 thing is repeated sequentially, first in C major, then in D minor. But then you can see how after that Mozart breaks away from that because it would be too boring to then do it in another key and another key. That would be too boring. So doing it once is cool, you know, repeating it here and here is cool, repeating it multiple times is boring. And then it goes on to something else. And even in this, I sort of see the closing theme in this kind of three, rest, ba-da-da. It kind of reflects the rhythm of the closing theme, but not the melodic configuration of the closing theme. But maybe there's some of that in there. So yes, there are some sequences, Brody. They're kind of in different places and different use. Some are used for modulation, some are used just to enhance the melodic structure of the piece. Any other questions? Okay, I will put the sound files in Canvas and the things so that they can be listened to. Maybe I'll just create a whole separate page because there's a lot of stuff here. And I would recommend listening to remember the Beethoven we covered last time, and this one, and try and hear, exposition, development, recapitulation, and then in the exposition, what's my first tonal area, what's my second tonal area, and how does that work out? And then look at the recapitulation, and so now where does theme 1 come back, or tonal area 1? How is that resolved in the recapitulation? And I think that will help you hear these things overall. Okay. Any questions? Problems? No? Okay, cool. I'll see you all next. So next week we'll cover secondary leading tone chords, and that will kind of round off review, pre-review, preview, review stuff that we've done. I think that'd be a good thing to do. Okay.